Hi, everyone. This is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and our blog and our newsletter and our great sponsors, your Dolce Vita, Italy Rooting, and Abiativo Casa. And we have a great guest today, a young man, author, who now lives in Brooklyn, but he's got a very interesting birthplace. So his name is Ryan Byrnes, and welcome, Ryan. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I love it. Yeah.
Cool. So before we go into, your Italian roots and the books and things like that, why don't you tell everybody about your interesting birthplace?
Okay. Yeah. So I was born in North Dakota on a nuclear missile base in a tornado. It was a pretty crazy story. Um, yeah, the tornado sirens were going off while my mom was giving birth. I've heard this story from her a lot, and they had to rush everyone into the hallway. Crazy story. Doctor had to come in and give me CPR and all this stuff. Um, yeah, because my we were living on a nuclear missile base at the time in Minot, and because my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot. Um, yeah, maybe that was my first debut. Maybe my publishing debut will be a little smoother. So
I'm
yeah,
sure. Well, yeah, that's certainly an
yeah,
interesting story. I don't know anyone who's born on a missile base. Uh, Although now I guess they sell the silos if you want to live in one. So, um, what got you interested in your Italian roots in the first place?
yeah. Well, I have always heard this story from my nana, who is the daughter of Italian immigrants. And she would always tell the story about how her mother gave her a ring that used to belong to an Italian duke and duchess. And I always wanted to know, like where did that story come from? Where did that ring come from? She always told me bits and pieces of the story, but I never quite understood it. And then in 2020, when the COVID lockdown happened, I started learning more about my Italian heritage and writing more about it. And I started writing some short stories, and I thought it would be a great topic for a book because it's always good to write about your own family because nobody else can tell that story except for you. So, I set up a lot of calls where I interviewed my nana and I took a lot of notes, did a lot of research. I read a lot of other books. Yeah, and I that's how I started learning more about my Italian heritage, and I just became obsessed with it after a while. Wanted to learn every little detail so I could relive what my ancestors went through when they came here. Yeah.
That's so great. And what's wonderful is, we're losing our heritage, and that's one of my missions is to get young people involved. So that's great. And I should introduce you I should introduce you to Dante Nazaro, who's a film guy, young film guy who's going to be
Oh
helping
yeah.
us put together a movie, and he's in Brooklyn too. So
Oh yeah.
uh,
I would love to talk to him. Yeah.
yeah, he's I guess Dante's maybe 26, 27, 28, something like that. But certainly closer to your age than mine, that's for sure.
Yeah. Dante. Good name.
So now was the family
Yeah.
originally from Brooklyn?
Yeah. Yeah. When my family first came from Sicily, a lot of them settled in Brooklyn, not too far from where I am now. Then, after another generation, some of them moved to New Jersey. A lot of them joined the military. And after that point, they kind of spread all over the country. And I grew up my family lived in North Dakota, Ohio, Illinois. They moved all over the place. So, but now I finally returned to Brooklyn just in August because I wanted to come back here and work in the publishing industry. And this is where all the publishing companies are. So, yeah.
I didn't even know that. And I grew up in New York City, so shows you how much I know about anything for that matter. So did you ever figure out where this ring came from?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I have the book with me. Um, Here's an early version of it. Yeah, my dear Antonio, and that story kind of yeah, I became obsessed and wanted to learn more and more and more about just the backstory. And so the ring, it, uh, I have pictures of it on my social media pages. The ring is it's a platinum ring, and it has like a swirl and three diamonds on it. It's done in like the Art Nouveau style, and yeah, it belongs to so my great grandfather, his first wife. Um, who he met when he was growing up in his uncle's barber shop. Um, she was the daughter of um, a woman was who, so her parents was a barber and this woman named Maria Minore, and Maria Minore was the daughter of a duke and duchess, and so she went and married a common barber. That was kind of scandalous. And so, according to the story, she was like disowned from her family because she had married a common barber. And then the two of them, around that time, they left Italy and moved to Tunisia, where they started a barber shop. Then they had their kids. So there was some kind of falling out with the family, but she still had that ring. And then she gave her that ring to her daughter. Then her daughter married my great grandfather, was his first wife. But then she died at around age 25 with tuberculosis. It was about 1925, I believe. Pretty tragic, but yeah. And then the ring came down to um, her friend, who then married my great grandfather and became his second wife. And that's the my great grandmother, and so she passed the ring down. So long story, but yeah,
No, that's cool. Yeah, you have to send me the family name because I'm gonna have to look that up in the Libro
oh yeah,
DR and see what I could find, you know.
yeah, yeah. We don't know who the Duke and Duchess were because this is all just based on stories from my nana. I've done a lot of research trying to pin down exactly who the Duke and Duchess could have been. The story is true. I have a few candidates of dukes and duchesses who lived in the area at the time, and some of them kind of match up with the story. So, but you can't really know for sure. So, yeah,
Yeah, what part of Sicily? What were they in?
yeah. A lot of my family grew up in. Um, there's a little town outside of Palermo called Partinico, and it's a small town. And a lot of the Orlandos, that's my family, they come from there. And there's a street there called, it's named after Vittorio Orlando, who was the Prime Minister of Italy during World War One. And he's actually related to us. Um, I go into that a little in the book. My great grandfather is a distant cousin of his. Um, yeah, yeah.
Ah, that's a great story. Yeah, well, you know, and the reason I asked is, you know, my grandmother was from two noble families, and I don't have any jewelry at all. I wish I did, but there's no jewelry. There's a few. I mean, you know, we found some of the homes. Actually, visited a couple of the places and things like that.
Oh,
Um, but it's hard to see that. And you know, my hook was I had my great grandfather's card, and that's how that's how I was able to actually find these people. I mean, there's so many people, you know, probably related to some because there was so much nobility in Italy, you know,
yeah.
high nobility, lesser nobility. I mean, there were dukes and counts and princes, they were all over the place. But to be able to find something, that's fantastic. But to be able to have it, you know, even if it wasn't from a a duke or a duchess, just to have that piece of history is fantastic. So where's the ring now?
My nana still wears it. From my understanding, it used to have three bands on it, and I think she like separated it and made three rings out of it and gave it to her daughters. Pretty sure that's what happened to it, but she still has one of the bands of it that she wears. But yeah,
That's cool. Well, I have to get her on this podcast. So
yeah. Oh, she's
let's cue
great.
her
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
because she's probably my age, right? I'm
Yeah.
73, so she's
He
probably
knows
in
more
that
than me
range, right?
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll have
Yeah.
to definitely have to get her on.
Yeah.
That would certainly be a fun interview for sure, especially if she grew up in Brooklyn, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
She
so
grew up in
that's
Brooklyn, not too far from where I'm living now. I just came here a few months ago, so yeah, I'm like re getting reacquainted with my roots here.
oh,
Yeah.
so
In fact,
she
yeah.
must be thrilled that you're down the block, huh?
Yeah, they tell me all kinds of stories of what it used to be like. My poppy um, grandfather, he said he would play stickball in the streets, back in the
Yeah.
1930s, and everything is so different now. He says, yeah,
It's yeah,
yeah,
it's I can't begin to tell you how different it is. Uh,
yeah.
it's really I grew up in Queens and I grew up on College Point. I don't know if you've heard of that or know where that is, but uh, back when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, College Point's a peninsula, and nobody went there because there was nothing
Oh
there.
yeah, yeah. It's hard to get there. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean there was no subway. A couple of buses went from Flushing, but there was no reason to go there when I was growing up. Prior to that, in the 1800s, it was actually all the rich people would go there, um, for because it was the country basically. They would get on a ferry from Manhattan and go to College Point because it was the country. And then, leading up to World War II, there were a lot of factories and things like that. There was one in particular, like a military plant, which most people wouldn't know, and there was uh, a rubber factory there, um, and all that industry
wow,
is it's all gone now.
wow,
There's nothing. In fact, Lily Tulip, the paper cup company was there. They had a factory there too.
wow.
Uh, so yeah, interesting stuff. So now, so you moved around a lot with the military then growing up, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. We definitely had to move a lot. I was born towards the end of my dad's career in the military, so I didn't. I only moved when I was 3 and when I was like 5 or 6, and then he retired. But my older siblings, they had to move to a lot of places. It was like Maryland, Florida, Indiana, like I think North Carolina somewhere. Like yeah, they moved all over the place. Yeah, that definitely takes a big toll on those military families that have to move everywhere. But I was able to keep myself busy with reading and writing, so
Yeah, oh,
yeah, yeah.
that's
So it
great.
worked
Yeah.
out.
And what was your dad? Was he involved with the missile programs and things like that, or what did he do?
He was a psychologist. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, I love my dad. Yeah, he was a psychologist, and he was one of the first people who was um after 9/11. They were one of the first groups that was sent to the Middle East. They were at a base in Kyrgyzstan that was like right gave them like access to Afghanistan. And he was stationed there and helped everyone get established there. And he there was a huge epidemic of PTSD, and that was his career was focused on kind of reforming the way that we treat PTSD for some of these long term like forever wars that really grind down on people after a while. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
it's got to be tough on them because they kept rotating back and forth and back and forth.
yeah,
But people of my generation that grew up with my uncles and stuff like that, they went to World War II and they were there for 3, 4, 5 years. You know,
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
and in fact, one of my uncles he was on one of the landing crafts at Iwo Jima. He
Wow,
was in the Navy and he drove one of those boats
wow.
that dropped off the Marines. Yeah.
That's pretty stressful.
Well, he
Wow,
said he didn't know they were being shot at until because they thought nothing was left on the island. And he
oh,
says then they heard the machine gun bullets come across the top of his head, and then
wow,
they realized, yeah, they're shooting back.
wow. I couldn't imagine that. Yeah. My so my great grandfather who came from Italy, um, yeah, I covered this in the book a little, but he he was there at the outbreak of World War One. Um, and so he was living in Tunisia at the time, and Tunisia was it was a French protectorate. So the French were kind of controlling it, but there were more Italian people living there than French. So there was always this tension that the French government was always worried that like the Italians would take over. And so there was this tension between the French and the Italians. And then when World War One started, they weren't sure like what sides the two countries would take during the war. And so now you have all these Italian people living in an area controlled by France. And it's all, yeah, there's a lot of tension there. But then eventually my great grandfather, he he wrote to his cousin who was the prime minister, and then he was able to um, he got placed as a barber in the military because he was training to become a barber in his uncle's shop, and then so he was sent to the front lines to cut the hair of the generals, all their fancy like mustaches and mutton chops that they had back then. Um, yeah,
That's a
so
great
that
job.
was his wartime story. Yeah,
You can't beat that. Yeah. Well, my
yeah,
cousin went to Vietnam and he got off the plane and they asked who knows how to cook. He raised his hand. And then they sent him to the mess hall and he had no idea what he was doing. And the sergeant says, well, why'd you raise your hand? And he said, I figured it was better than getting shot at. He spent the his whole tour in Vietnam in the officers' mess in Saigon.
oh wow,
And they taught him how to cook. And that's it. And he came out and he opened the restaurant and all that stuff.
wow, yeah,
But I didn't realize until I started doing some of this research that there were a lot of Italians in Tunisia. And my grandfather, my mother's father, he he was in the Italian army and fought in Libya.
oh
I
wow,
think it was
yeah,
1910, 1911, just before World War One
wow,
started.
yeah,
And that's one of the stories why they came. Supposedly, my grandmother told them, "You already fought in one war. You're not going to fight in another one."
yeah,
And they wound up coming to America because her brother was here, I think. Um,
yeah,
yeah, so that's a fascinating history. That's really cool stuff. You
yeah.
know. Um, so so now the first book is that story. Now you have another one coming out, right?
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
So yeah, this one, yeah, My Dear Antonio, it comes out on March 26th.
Oh,
This is
that's the new one. That's the new
yeah,
book.
yeah, this it's follows the life story of my great grandfather and great grandmother, and it tells the story of how they both grew up, um, were separated from their family and had to live in Tunisia, and then they kind of got separated, and then they both went their separate ways. She got engaged to someone else. He got married to someone else. But then somehow fate had some kind of plan, and then they still ended up getting married when they were around 30, when they ran into each other in Brooklyn, of all places, and
Crazy.
against all odds. Yeah,
That's just crazy. So what was the first book? The book that's been published. What book is that?
yeah. So my first book, was published in 2019, and that book is called Royal Beauty Bright. And I wrote that. Uh, that one was pretty crazy to try and get that published because it was my first book published. But I wrote it in when I was a senior in high school.
Ah, you're making me sick here.
Yeah, and that was a huge learning curve because then I went into college and I really wanted to get it published. I didn't know how the process worked, so I just sent out hundreds and hundreds of letters to people try and get it published. And then I ended up getting a deal with this small like independent publisher that had like two people working at it. And then they told me that they were planning on closing down the company, and I was like, oh well, there goes my book. And then we had this idea of trying to like sell the company to someone else to keep it going. And so I found publishing, this indie publishing company called Amphora Publishing Group. And I had kind of known some people who worked with them in the past, so I put the two of them together, and they ended up merging, and then it saved my book. And that's how it got published. So I was like, this book's gonna get published one way or another. So yeah.
Yeah, boy, that's that's a lesson for everybody that's young. Don't give up, and you have to make your own way. You really do.
Yeah. But yeah, that one was published in 2019. That was my senior year of college. And that one is it's a historical fiction novel about the Christmas truce of 1914. Um, for people who don't know, it was the first Christmas in World War One. They expected that the war was going to be over by Christmas, but turned out that it was turning into this grinding trench warfare that was just going to go on forever until one person ran out of money, basically. And then, uh, and then so the soldiers started to realize where this was going. And then by Christmas, a lot of them decided that they didn't want to fight anymore. And so there are a lot of scattered events throughout the front line where, like, the French soldiers or the British soldiers, they would just put their weapons down, and the German soldiers put their weapons down, and they all just decided they didn't want to fight anymore. And then they had a giant Christmas party in the no man's land in between the two sides. And they made like snowmen and played soccer and uh, gave gifts and stuff like that. And it was totally bizarre because it was not organized. It was totally spontaneous and grassroots, and everyone kind of just decided on their own. They didn't want to fight anymore. Um, and like nothing like that has ever happened on that scale before. And yeah, it was pretty wild. And so the book is about these two brothers. One of them is on the autism spectrum, and he is mistakenly drafted to fight in the war. And then the other brother is estranged, because they kind of had a falling out because of the family difficulties of having to raise someone who's on the spectrum. And then so he has to redeem himself by going to get his brother back from the front line. And then they all kind of cross paths on Christmas Day when the truce happens. But yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that's super cool. That's
yeah.
great. And at night, how'd you come up with this idea at such a young age?
Oh, well, I mean, I've always wanted to write books, so I always have ideas that I'm working on, and I had these characters in my head for a long time, and I originally had written this story, but it was in a different setting. Um, it was set like some in my town in the Midwest, and then I heard about this Christmas truce from my history class in high school, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. And then so I dropped them in that backdrop, basically. Yeah.
You're killing me. Yeah, that's just so. I wish I could do that. I wish
Yeah,
I could do
it was real fun.
that.
And then yeah, it came out in November
So,
2019. So I in November and December 2019, I put together a little promotional campaign for it. I went to some bookstores and did some events, and the coolest thing though was that in I think Rockford, Illinois, they have a historical village there, and they actually do a reenactment of the Christmas truce every year. So
ah,
yeah, it worked out perfectly. So I went there and I set up like a table. I was selling my books, and then they had the actual reenactment of the event, and that was so cool. But yeah,
that's super cool. Yeah.
yeah,
The only reenactment we ever went to, we lived in England for a couple of years, and we went to War of the Roses reenactment, which was really pretty cool. And these guys they were firing off like 5 and 10 pound cannons, and the whole ground was shaking. A- and I looked at my wife and said, I can't imagine what these guys go through today. Of course, your dad knows, right? um, because they would, they're shooting these blank rounds, 5 and 10 pounders, and like it was just unbelievable that the sound and everything like that. But
Yeah,
that's that's really neat. That's really neat. And you've written a bunch of short stories and things too, right?
yeah, yeah. I published about I think like 4 or 5 short stories in literary magazines. That's always fun. Um, that's like a good way to like polish up on some skills. And if you have like an idea for a story you want to try out, but you don't want to like write a whole book, it's just like an easy way to test something out. So I enjoy writing short stories. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm a very bad writer. I do some things on my blog, and I've done 2 books, uh, not to any
Oh,
literary acclaim for sure, but I wrote them mostly for myself. And the first one was about my research and my family, and the second one was about my banking career, and that was easy because I knew everything because it was my story, and also I didn't have to do footnotes, which I had to do in the first book, which made me nuts. Um, but for somebody young like you, or yeah, even somebody old like me who wants to write a book, what kind of what how would you advise them to start? I guess the short story is a good start to write something
yeah,
like that to see if you could do something. But um, what other advice would you give somebody?
yeah. Yeah, my advice would be first, just read a lot. Um, Books that are kind of contemporary that have come out maybe within the last 5 years that are kind of in the genre you want. I would just read as much as you can and trying to get a feel for like the style and the voice. And and then after that, it's usually good to have like a plan for um, like how you're gonna write it. Usually I try. I have a kind of like a method for writing where I'll take the book and I'll split it up into chunks, and then each chunk I'll try to just write it as fast as I can. It doesn't have to be good. Don't worry about it too much. And then I write it and I send it off to like a dozen or so people, like friends and families and readers, and then I talk to them carefully and ask for feedback and ask them questions on what they thought of it. And then I rewrite it and then I kind of just go through this process where I just rapidly try to like make new iterations of each chunk of the book. Um, and that way uh, you can keep improving it as you go. And then that way you don't write the thing and then realize you made a mistake and you have to go back and rewrite it all. Yeah, and that way that method is an efficient way of doing it because so sometimes, like if you don't have a plan and you don't know where you're going, you can get stuck, and then it takes you years and years to finish it. And then, if you're working at that long scale, then like there isn't enough time in the day to like, uh, finish everything. If you're doing it that long. But yeah,
Yeah, and I kind of did that a little bit with my first book. Not that I knew what I was doing, but I changed direction a couple of times, because of how I wanted to include things and do things and what story I was trying to tell. And it does evolve, as you go forward, like you said. Um, so now Burns obviously isn't an Italian name. Have you researched, your mom's family?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, my name's Ryan Byrnes. It's an Irish name. Yeah. But yeah, so both of my grandfathers are Irish, and then both my grandmothers on both sides are Italian. So there's a yeah, so this book is about my grandmother, like on my mom's side, about her family. But but yeah, there's also a lot of Irish heritage in my family too. But yeah,
Yeah, well, that's there's obviously a lot of that in New York. A lot of they mixed and matched, especially back then. Did you find anything interesting with the Irish family?
oh yeah, yeah. There's a lot of cool stories about the Irish side of the family. Um, we we actually found that they came from Ireland on my mom's dad's side. They're Irish. They came from Ireland in like the 1800s or something, and the first place they settled was in Newfoundland, Canada. It wasn't Canada at the time, but they settled in a little fishing village there, and my mom actually went to go visit it over the summer, and she took a lot of pictures, and it looks very beautiful. It's on the coast of Newfoundland, and there were all these tiny little houses that Irish immigrants had lived in, and they had a little fishing village at the time. Um, and there's a lot of she went there, and there was a local historian who had all the records and knew everything about the family. He told them all these stories and how there's like a street named after them and everything. And yeah, so
Wow.
maybe one day I'll write a book about them.
That's
That would be fun.
cool. Yes, that's
Yeah.
really cool. That's really neat. I was only in Ireland once. My son and I, we were in Dublin for a few days. Great. I mean, really great place. And the only place to have a Guinness, that's for sure. Tastes completely different in Ireland. Like the olive oil in Italy, the Guinness in Ireland tastes completely different. Have you been able to get to Italy yet, or you haven't gone yet?
I've never been there, but I really want to go. We still have family there who I've emailed them before, who still live in Partinico. So I would really want to go visit Sicily one day and yeah, just meet my family. That'll be nice. I will need to have a translator or learn Italian or something because I don't know Italian myself, but
I don't know it either. I've tried so many times to learn it, just starting in college, but my daughter told me to try Duolingo, so I'm using that now.
oh,
And actually,
cool,
that's not bad, um,
cool.
because it's I'm a visual person, so it's got visual prompts and things like that. And unlike some of the other ones, um, they have you speak, type, read, give you a
Wow,
story that you have to listen. So it's kind of a different way of learning.
hmm, that's interesting.
And
Yeah.
it's not expensive either. I don't know. I think it was $68 for the year or something like that.
Wow,
Um, um,
I'll have to try that. Then I can travel there.
uh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, you get by.
yeah,
Y- hand signals work, pointing, because I don't, like I said, I
yeah,
don't speak it. And of course, in the small towns, a lot of times they don't speak any English. The big places you get by, and like on the subway, things are in English and Italian. So
yeah.
you kind of figure it out as you go along. And um the menus are pretty familiar for the most part. Just don't ask for cheese on your seafood dish like my wife did. They don't like that.
Yeah.
That's not
Speaking of
something.
speaking of traveling to Italy, well, my parents visited Italy one time, and they I noticed that you in a previous episode of this podcast you interviewed Brett Tillman.
Mhm.
Um, he's like a Franciscan tour, gives Franciscan tours. They actually did a tour through him. So yeah,
Ah.
my parents know him. They went on a tour with him to Assisi.
Oh, wow. See, it's like such a small world, you
Yeah,
never know what you're gonna find out, or, who you're gonna run into. That's
yeah.
really fascinating. Yeah, that was a good interview. He's a good guy. Um, and I haven't been, we've gone a few times, um, but we haven't been up north yet. So we said the next time
Oh,
we
okay.
go, the last two trips were kind of, um, looking for family and roots and things like that. But the next time we really want to, go to Piedmont and maybe by the lakes and Pisa and places like that, to Florence and that kind of thing. But it's you could look at all the pictures of Italy you want. It's not the same as when you're there.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting kind of diverse place. Uh so so you have to go back. You definitely have to make the trip back there one
Oh
of these
yeah.
points. But you have plenty of time. You got a lot more time than me. Um and you know what? If you're eligible, you should get your Italian citizenship at some point. I wish I did it years
Oh yeah.
ago.
I've heard you can
Um,
do that. Yeah.
Yeah, what's great about it, especially I'm doing it now mostly for my kids because my kids are young. They're one's 28, one's 26. Um, and I'm doing it mostly for them because if they ever want to visit, spend any time there, maybe someday retire there or something like that, you get all the benefits of a regular Italian citizen once
Yeah.
you go.
Oh, it's a
And
good deal.
school is peanuts compared to here. I mean, it's
Yeah.
yeah. But I have a friend who she lives there now. She's an Italian citizen. She has their equivalent of Medicare, and she's entitled to every single benefit that any other Italian citizen gets.
Wow.
So in that sense,
That's,
it's really, really good. And especially if you ever wanted to buy a house or open a business or spend more than 3 months there and write a book, spend a year there
yeah.
and write a book, you have your Italian citizenship. So
Oh yeah. Oh, that would
that's
be
a
nice. Yeah.
that's a good thing to have. And then you can learn some Italian. Um, well, this has been a lot of fun. So before we go, where can people find you, find your book?
Yeah. Yeah. So my book is My Dear Antonio right here. It comes out on March 26th. You can buy it uh, on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Bookshop.com. And if you want to learn more, you can follow me at Ryan Byrnes Writes. That's my uh, on Facebook. You can look up Ryan Byrnes Writes. On Instagram, you can look up Ryan Byrnes Writes. Um, Also YouTube. It's the same name for all the platforms, so you can look me up there. In my website too. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and yeah, I'm really excited to see how this book campaign turns out. So yeah.
I'm sure it'll go well, and I'll do anything I can to help you get it out there. That's for sure. No question about that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, yeah. I hope we can talk again. Yeah,
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 well, I got to get your grandparents on. That's for sure.
yeah, yeah.
All right, thanks again.